Organizations seem to be in this endless pursuit of high-performing teams. It's a state of nirvana, if you will, but it seems very elusive. How do you think about that?
That's a good question. So I think the term high-performing teams is a misnomer. We might look at a term called real teams that have varied performance over time. Sometimes they have high performance, sometimes they're in low performance. It depends. No team can sustain high performance all the time. It's actually an unrealistic expectation. The key is that real teams will notice when they're in lower states of performance. They'll notice when they're off their mark, and they will self-regulate to get back to that state of high performance.
So what are some of the things then will cause a team to slip into lower states of performance? Are there any fundamentals that you see that happen, more often than not?
It really depends by team, but there are some standards that we can share, and we'll divide them up into external forces and internal forces. On the external side, I'll mention two. The first is change in budgets or change in resourcing. A team all of a sudden doesn't have the budget or the resources it needs to get its job done. Therefore, it has to pare back, and it can't quite do what it used to do. It loses some freedom, and that might start to put pressure on the way the team interacts. The second is a forced change in membership. So we have a client right now where an individual was promoted out of the team into a higher role from VP to SVP, and a new VP was brought in with a very different set of principles and norms. And what it did is it really upset the balance of the team that was operating with a set of behaviors and processes which were very much settled. And that has set the team back as it tries to grapple with that. On the internal side, I'll mention two there too. One is missing a goal. The team is doing really well, it misses a goal, it misses a deliverable, and there's a real consequence of that. Perhaps it's a financial consequence, or it's just a public consequence, and that can upset the team. A team that's been doing well for quite some time all of a sudden doesn't know how to deal with the criticism, and it leads to internal conflict and internal blaming, which hadn't been there previously. And the second one is just sort of a natural consequence of performance over time, is that teams become complacent and they get into groupthink. And we kind of let go of those accountability parameters. We don't hold each other accountable. I let you go, you let me go. And over time, you settle into a place of stagnation. And we have a client right now where that's very real. And what they've noticed is over time, where they used to keep each other to their commitments, lately they've been letting each other get away with non-committing. And it started at first small, and it's grown bigger, and now there's no way back to where they were, which was they used to call each other out publicly. And it leads to a little bit of embarrassment, and then a bit of a distancing, like, I don't want to be a part of this anymore.
So what can a team do to, let's say, notice these behaviors or these issues earlier on and get back on track?
The key ingredient to getting yourself back up into performance is to realize you're no longer there. That's the muscle.
Yes.
The awareness, yeah.
We tend to be like fish in an aquarium. We don't see ourselves anymore.
Yeah.
So what it means is there has to be a conversation that is alive and present, that is around how are we doing? And that's part of the norms and part of the ethos of the group. How are we doing? What's going on? It's a regular check-in, which is very present in the agile teams, but it has to be present in any team. If that muscle doesn't exist, the team can fade, and it will not have the place or the mechanism by which to have the conversation, which is the one that says, how are we doing? Which is the very conversation that allows the team to actually identify what's going on. So I would put that as a fundamental element of great teams.
What I really like about agile teams is the fact that retrospectives are scheduled into their norms from the get-go, which means that every few weeks, the whole team sits down and says, over the past few weeks, how did we do? What kind of work processes did we have? Did we hit our targets? And where can we improve? And when you build these sorts of rituals into your team process, there's an automatic accountability when people start slipping, when the goals aren't met. And then you can step back and say what needs to change.
So I think what you said, Shivanee, is so important both in agile teams and in any other team, that there is something in the culture and expectation that we give ourselves feedback, we give each other's feedback, and we're always reflecting about how we're doing. A consequence of that is that when something goes wrong, it's not such a big deal that we have to talk about, oh my gosh, I have to have a feedback conversation. This is just part of what we're always discussing, and it becomes a lot more likely that those difficult conversations are going to happen, and they're going to happen effectively. And there's not so much of a barrier to that. And we've worked with a number of clients where that's part of what they're trying to change in their culture, to try to get a sense of continuous improvement and continuous feedback.
So what are the challenges organizations have in teaming or building strong teams?
So part of it is just understanding what it means to build a team, and that an effective team needs to be built, and it's not just going to happen because you get some really smart, really talented individual contributors in a team. That's often a misconception, that if you get a group of really excellent individual performers, that they will make an excellent high-performing team. So just getting that realization that it's not automatic. And another piece of it is having the skills and tools that are necessary for teaming, because processes like making a decision or holding somebody accountable are really different in a team versus just holding your direct report accountable or trying to make a decision on a smaller scale. And there are specific tools, processes, methods for that, but often those aren't present in the culture. People simply don't know them. So that is a barrier. Fortunately, a fairly easy to overcome one.
I'll add two more to those. The first one for me is just the natural hierarchical nature of organizational designs, where there is status and title. And when there's status and title and it's present in a team, it's much more difficult to share decision making, do common problem solving, listen and be candid. And the second one for me is around, quite practically, just the incentive structures. So much of the incentive structures in organizations today are focused on the individual. The individual has goals. Those goals are either performance or development goals, and the individual is compensated, fixed and variable, for those goals. Therefore, it's an individual-centric view of the world, which when put into a collective doesn't really have that person want to share in the work with others.
I'd like to take off on your first point on the hierarchy. What happens is that leaders have a very command and control mindset where they tell teams or direct reports what to do. Now, the minute they want to create autonomous or self-directed teams, they need to be able to step back and take a coaching and guiding role. But very often what happens is, in their stepping back, they won't actually guide or coach enough. The team will flounder, and then the leader will step back in and say, look, I knew you guys couldn't do it. So the real goal is to understand for leaders how to step back gradually and always maintain a supportive and guiding presence to allow these teams to then learn how to be autonomous and flourish.